Hi everybody, and welcome to the first session of the 2023 Cycle Touring Festival. For those who don't already know, this is the 9th Cycle Touring Festival. For our first 5 years, we were in person in Clitheroe, and this is the 4th event that we've done virtually. Last year, we were lucky enough to have something virtual and in person, and we are hoping to do that again this year, but I'm about 8 months pregnant at the moment, so much depends on the new baby and how we get on. So yeah, who knows, but keep your eye on the website, and hopefully something in person will happen in September. So for those who don't already know, the virtual festival, most of the sessions are run over Zoom webinars. So a Zoom webinar is possibly different to how you're used to using Zoom, in that you're not on the screen, so you can't see your own face on the screen, and we can't see you. The only people you can see is myself as the host and Daniel, who's our speaker today. It also means that you can't unmute yourself and speak, but if you have got questions for Daniel, then by all means pop them in the Q&A box. It's also really nice if you can introduce yourself in the chat box and, you know, let us know where you are today. And if you want to add any comments, then please do pop them in the chat box. But if it really helps me to keep track of what questions you've got for the speaker, if you can put them in the Q&A box, because sometimes things get a bit lost in the chat box. Everything's free at the virtual festival, as you probably already know, but as we do have some overheads in terms of running the website and running Zoom, and we do pay for some admin time these days. So donations are very welcome. I'll pop a link to the donation PayPal account in the chat box later on in the talk, and if you feel like making a donation, that would be much appreciated, but there's no pressure, because the purpose of this really is to excite everybody in a dreary January about the joys of cycle touring. Great, so we'll move on to hear about Daniel speaking about Morocco and high atlas touring. I'm hoping that Daniel will introduce himself in slightly more detail than that, but I think I'll hand over to him and hope everyone enjoys the talk.
Thanks, Laura. And I'm very excited to be the first speaker at the festival. What I'm hoping to do is to give you some information about what it's like in Morocco, and what it's like to tour through the Atlas Mountains, and hopefully you may be inclined to give that a go. So high Atlas touring, I'll be talking about what to expect, what the weather's like, the kind of things you're going to encounter, getting there, a little bit about kit along the way. I don't know how you feel. I think there's a continuum amongst us of those of us who it's not about the kit at all, it's all about the experience. And then there are other, those of us who are a little bit more geeky, who are more interested in every tiny little piece of kit. I think myself and my two friends, who I'm going to introduce shortly, are around about in the middle. It is about the experience, but it's nice to have a bit of information about the kit as well. So I will just talk a little bit about the kit as we're going along. So I'm going to introduce the three of us. We're all in our 50s. We all have full-time jobs, and we tend to fit these tours in around our family lives at work. So they tend to be around about a week long, and we tend to do them away from the summer holidays. So typically October, Easter, and these two particular tours that I'm going to reference today were both in February. So we'll give you an idea of what is possible in February, and perhaps what to expect and what can go wrong as well. So here we go. Here's Gordon. There he is with his quad affair. We call Gordon the small one. He's got a small framed bike. He tends to carry a lot less kit than myself and Steve. He is quite small, and that tends to mean that when it comes to the hills, he's the first to the top. So that's Gordon. Steve, so we're going to call Gordon the small one. What can we say about Steve? Well, I would say look at those legs. Steve tends to be very fast on the flat. Over a 300-meter sprint, you can't catch him. When it is pan flat, we are hanging on his coattails. When it comes to descending, he's typically off the front. But the slightest bit of gradient, and Steve pops out the back. But that's fine. We ride at a fairly slow pace, and we regularly catch up with each other. I'm roughly in the middle. And typically when we're climbing, that will mean that Gordon's off up the front, I'm in the middle, and Steve's at the back. And as I say, we regularly catch up with each other along the way. So these two tours I'm going to talk to you about, one in 2017 and one in 2019, were both focused on the high Atlas Mountains. The first one, we weren't really super organised. We got flights from, I think, Stansted into Aswira, and we were going to keep kind of in the flat area towards the coast, but at the last minute, we made a bit of a change and decided to go into the high Atlas. So that first day, we had to transfer across to Marrakesh in a car, which was about 50 miles, and it cost us about £50, which we thought was okay for the three of us and all our equipment. And that is really easy to organise in Morocco. There's always somebody who can help you and who will organise or make a few phone calls, and then along comes a car, you squeeze all your kit in, and everything's fine. So we started off from Marrakesh. We crossed over the high Atlas. You do crest over the highest point, which has a kind of height marker, and you've got this sensation that you are climbing a single hill. But what we've discovered is it takes about 2 days to pass through this mountainous area, and all of that time that you are climbing a few descents and then climbing and a few descents. So onto the plane, down to Agadir, and then we took a short car switch then up to Sidi Kauki, and then finished off the last day into Aswira. So that was our 2017 trip. And in 2019, we kind of went over towards this area. So again, on that occasion, we flew in and out of Marrakesh. Stayed in a hotel there the first night and the last night, which is a bit of a pain because it loses some cycling time, but it does mean that you're a little bit more organised getting off the plane and a chance to pack to build your bikes at a more leisurely pace. So in 2017, we've taken this route here. In 2019, we climbed up this pass called the Tizi and Tishka, and then dropped down to a place called Ouarzazate. And then this section on the plains is quite flat. And I'm going to tell you at the end the story of the R307, which is this route that to Demnat. And then we ran out of time and did a car transfer back to Marrakesh. So those are the two trips. Both occasions we were using EasyJet, which we find is really useful. About £90 for your bike to get you there and back. And then typical cost for your luggage, and then your airfare. We tend to be paying around about £300 to £350 to get there and back, which is fairly reasonable. Luggage allowance is not an issue. You've got about 50 kilos altogether, so no problems with the weight, and no problem getting our bikes there. We've tended to use the CTC plastic bags, lots of pipe lagging and tape. But we've had no issues with that. It does mean, however, that you've got to build your bike up at the other side. And we've typically done that at the hotel. That's Steve just contemplating how many zip ties he's used there. We are planning to go back to Morocco this Easter, and our plan is to not have that first night in a hotel. We're going to build the bike straight out of the airport, and maybe hide the bags under a rock somewhere. That's the idea, but to avoid that kind of delay of that first night in a hotel. But building the bike's not an issue, and then off we go. A little bit about the kit. I think lots of people take that photograph, don't they? They all look the same. But we're typically taking just some decathlon meals, a little bit of ready cooked rice. We've got chairs, Neo Air, Thermarest kind of bed. That's an alt kit, down sleeping bag and down jacket. This pan, we just take one pan between the three of us, and then we all have our own little pan sets for our water-based brews and things. But we managed to do all our cooking in that one pan, which saves a bit of weight. Tent. And And toilet roll, yes, you may find that there's not as many public toilets out in the high Atlas Mountains, so you do need to be prepared for wild loo adventures. I'll leave that for you to work out. Steve typically tends to pack a little bit heavier than myself and Gordon. We're always teasing him. He always takes multiple copies of everything. I think you can see 2 selfie sticks there. That looks like 2 packs of cards, just to be on the safe side. First time we went in 2017, I think we discovered that he'd got 4 knives, just in case. And on this occasion, I think he was taking no chances there with the zip ties, prepared for every eventuality. But typically, those are the kind of things that we're taking with us. We've decided on the Morocco trip to take a multi-fuel stove. We couldn't find anywhere that wasn't quite a detour for us to get the canister gas in Morocco. There are the odd decathlons knocking around, but nothing nearby to where we were. So we relied on the multi-fuel stove. This is the stove. I've got one of these and Steve's got one. At the time, it didn't have the same following as the MSR whisper lights and so on. It didn't have that kind of 20, 30, 40 years worth of reviews. But this stove's now been around for about 10 or 15 years. It's a really, really brilliant stove. It runs on petrol, diesel, paraffin, white gas. It'll even use gas cylinders. You don't have to change the jet for any of those different fuels. And the handy thing about it is when you buy it, you get this little multi-tool, which has a magnet which sweeps underneath the bottom of the stove and forces a little needle to go through the jet and clean it. So you don't even need to dismantle it to clean it. It's a really, really great piece of kit. And what we've tended to do is we found that the simmer is absolutely brilliant on it. No issues with that at all. What we'll do with the fuel bottle that we're taking on the plane, obviously it has to be empty. And it has to be empty for, we think, a couple of weeks beforehand, so there's no smell or residue of fuel in there. But we've covered up the stickers, the fuel warning stickers on the fuel bottle, just to make sure that an over-enthusiastic baggage handler isn't going to spoil your trip by confiscating your fuel bottle because it breaches some regulations. But we've had some fabulous meals using that stove. Picking up your petrol when you get to the other side is not an issue. They sometimes are a little bit reluctant to put that in a small fuel bottle, but we found if you just waltz up and help yourself, it's already happened, and you manage to get your fuel. Up in the mountains, it's slightly different. What we've tended to find in the mountains is that we stop, and there's always somebody gathers around. A little bit of sign language, we're able to indicate that we want some more fuel in the bottle. Along come some adults, and again, a bit of sign language, we're able to explain that we need some fuel, a bit of sniffing going on. They come back with usually a glass pop bottle. Again, we sample that with a bit of a sniff test, and we're confident it's fuel. A few DRAMs peeled off, and we managed to get that refuel. So that is in the middle of nowhere, in a village in the middle of the mountains. So you know, it's straightforward if you've got that multi-fuel stove. And as I say, we tend to take just that one pan, and we'll manage to just get enough to feed the 3 of us in there. And then our water-based products are in our separate pans. So many a good meal with the stove there. Worth noting that some of the bottles do have a little bit of a lining inside, which can, if you store your fuel in the bottle, delaminate slightly and block up the jet, which we did have a problem with on one occasion. But that's easy to service in the field. Tents. I changed that tent now, but at the time I was using an MSR hubba, and I know a lot of us have got those tents. They are really superb. They cover all bases. The two berth tent, I think, is perfect. And you've got that opportunity to kind of spread your gear out inside, keep everything inside, bikes locked up outside. A really fabulous tent. This is us at around about, I think probably about 1,500 meters in 2017 up the TZ and test. It looks like I'm just dismantling my tent there. Gordon's got, or had at the time, a decathlon tent. He's just changed that for a very similar looking Van Gogh. And Steve was using a decathlon tent at the time. He's had another one since then, and now he's on to the MSR, the one that's very similar to the Hubba Hubba, but a little bit more tougher. Here's us in 2019. I think that's a fab picture there. That was about 1,800 meters. We're sleeping in a dried up riverbed. We just managed to get out of sight of the road. That's the Hubba Hubba. Steve's tent behind there. I think that's me. And I think Gordon's just behind this little spur of rock, just making sure we're away from the view of the road. And yeah, perfect for the kind of conditions that we were facing there. So a little bit about the weather. You might recognise that's a Crowded House album cover. I think that's Not Always Take the Weather With You. 4 seasons in one day. And I'm going to take you through a day just so that you can get a flavour of the kind of weather you can expect in February. It's perfectly okay to tour the high atlas in February. I probably wouldn't do it in January. I noticed on Facebook this morning there was the post showing snow down on the down at sea level in some areas, but we found it was fine in February. So this is a 48-hour period. That's Steve, obviously in shirt sleeves. I'm guessing it's around about 12 or 15 degrees there. We are in a day 2 of climbing through the mountains, and clearly it's warm enough for short sleeves there. By the time we got to lunch, that's Steve's camera smile. He only has one camera smile. We were a little bit more wrapped up there, a bit windy, a bit chilly. I would guess about 7 or 8 degrees at the most. And then we're climbing, and obviously we're nice and warm there. You can see I've got both buffs off, and I've also got my woolly hat just there, just in case, but nice and warm because we're climbing. And that really is a stunning climb. It's absolutely amazing. Not an issue with the traffic. There are crawler lanes for the odd lorry that comes up. And as you can see, the roads are really quiet. But, you know, on and on and on through the mountains, getting slightly higher all the time, but a breathtaking climb. And then we're near the top there, so clearly it's getting a little bit colder. And this one on the right here, it looks like it's a dodgy photograph. It's not. These are little flecks of snow. It's beginning to snow as we crest over the top of that, or the highest point of that particular set of the mountains. That was about 4 o'clock. We descended for about another hour, and then we managed to kind of check into an auberge, like a guest house, because it really was beginning to snow quite heavily. Later on that evening, we took this photograph. It was belting down with snow, and we were beginning to worry, would we get cut off in the mountains? You know, we knew that we'd got a long descent to make, but were we going to be able to ride in the snow the next morning? And the next morning, we were faced with quite a significant snowfall. I would say probably about 6 or 7 inches altogether. And you can see there that as we set up, we were really worried, are we going to be able to cope with this snow? But it was okay. A couple of cars had passed already, had just cleared a little bit of a track for us. And so beautiful. What a breathtaking sight that was. It really was kind of like a privilege to be there and see that those mountains bathed in snow with that kind of sunlight. We were just beaming from ear to ear. It was really exciting. You can see there at the side, you know, we'd had about that 6 inches of snow, but we were loving it, absolutely loving it. It was bitterly cold. We found that out a few minutes later when Steve had a puncture and we had to fix his puncture, but it was gorgeous. We found that any spray that was coming up from the road was freezing immediately. We'd got these kind of ice build up on the leading edges of our frame. It really was quite chilly, but quite exciting to be able to ride in that beautiful environment. I mean, just look at that, it was stunning. This is our road going down the pass there, around that little edge there, and then eventually we drop down into this little valley. But I don't think many people see Morocco with the snow and then without the snow, because later on that day, as we began to descend and drop down into that kind of that gorge, we're clear that we were just beginning to drop below the snow line. And then it was absolutely gorgeous. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the same day, it was probably about 17 degrees and getting warmer. We were beginning to notice the heat of the sun. It really was beautiful. And then dropping down, this is probably about 1,000 meters. We've come down from these mountains in the background. It was a beautiful, beautiful ride. And we couldn't stop laughing about the range of weather that we'd had that day. By the next day, this is Gordon the next morning, he's burnt his nose and had to fashion some kind of homemade nose guard. I've burnt the back of my hands. They're beginning to swell up. So we'd had genuinely every weather you could possibly imagine. So a bit of a summary there. It was well below freezing at night, 10 to 15 during the day, but it can, on a really nice day, be up to 20 degrees and even further. Obviously, if you go later on in the year, it's 39 degrees, it's scorching. So if you are going to go to Morocco, you do have to kind of go out of the main season, but February is doable. And of course, it does sometimes rain. This was a particular day where we'd had a very soggy night and a very soggy departure, but the sun came out, brightened up, so we stopped for lunch, got all our kit out, dried everything out, and we were fine for the next evening. Okay, a little bit about the bikes then. We've all got steel, traditional touring bikes. Gordon's got his Quad Affair. I've got a Tour de Fer, both Genesis bikes. Steve's got a Jarmis Aurora Elite. That frame went as my bike in 2017, but Steve's rebuilt it into a really fine machine. And we are the kind of guys that we're always tinkering with our bikes, changing something. So that's my flat bar setup. This was a photograph taken in Croatia about a year ago. But on the tour to Morocco, I had a drop bar setup. Pretty standard setup. We're using mainly Oakley panniers, usually triples or doubles at the front, making use of some mountain bike gearing. And the usual type of components, dynamo, front dynamo, that's a Supernova front and back lights, Chris King headset, etc., etc. And the Brook saddle, that particular Brook saddle, that frame collapsed. I sent that off to Brooks, and they put the same leather onto a brand new frame. And put the copper rivets in, and so I've managed to save that saddle, even though the frame collapsed, which they do sometimes, don't they? So pretty standard setup. And we've got this little gadget out the back here. This is one of Gordon's inventions. So this is to save a bit of time, not taking mud guards because it's too much of a faff to build them back up at the airport. So a bit of Corotech, zip tied on, and acts as a little bit of a mud guard, which we've managed to put onto our bikes. Okay, a little bit about the hospitality. This is us at the top of the TZ and Tess, the first year that we went. That's my old bike, which is now Steve's bike. Gordon's got his Quad Affair there. And Steve's got his camera grin. We were feeling really pleased with ourselves that we'd managed to get to the top of that pass, but we were absolutely freezing. It was pretty chilly up there on that occasion. You do have to be prepared. There are options to get food, but very often that's the kind of terrain that you're on and there's nobody there, or it appears so. But always in Morocco, there's always somebody. It's not like our moorland and mountains where there's nobody there other than the odd hiker. People live in this part of the mountains. And you probably can't see on there, but there's a little lady walking the road there with a donkey. There's always farmers. And if you're stopped by the side of the road, somebody will come up to you. And even though they can't speak English, they will offer you some food. It's part of their hospitality. So you're never going to get completely stuck. Every tiny little village you go through will typically have a tagine on the go. And even though it's a little bit Wild West, that's the entire village. You can just see there, back into the mountains, that little strip of shops. But there's always somebody willing to serve you some food and a cup of Moroccan mint tea, which is really, really nice. So not too much of a worry. One thing to just watch out for, very often you'll have these cafes by the side of the road. We sat down at this cafe for, well, it's to the left of this picture, for about 20 minutes, and we're getting a bit frustrated that the waiter wasn't really paying us attention. And eventually a guy came over to us and he said, you know, do you need some help? And we said, yes, we do. He said, right, come with me. You need to come to the butcher's, which is part of the same outfit, and you need to buy your meat. So he took us over to the butcher's, and literally the butcher will be slicing off slabs of beef or pork directly from the carcass, placing it on the scales onto a plate, and then you walk with that next door, and the guy then will cook that up for you and serve that with some bread and some water and a mint tea. So that is something you need to be aware of. And you also need to be aware that some of the cuts of meat are maybe not to our Western tastes. We did manage to buy mince from this butcher, but it took quite a bit of explaining before he managed to realise what we were after. So it was spaghetti bolognese that night, but fortunately we didn't have to eat the offal that he was trying to sell us. The bread is always the same. It's always this flat bread. Tastes great at first. After a week of it, pretty fed up of it, but it does the job. We found the odd shop where we could buy bits of cheese. So that looks like one evening we're having a little bit of an evening party. Looks like we're on the whiskey there. Steve with his little whiskey tumblers, and that looks like my hip flask. MSR folding chopping board, lifesaver. We take that everywhere, and that's my one Opinel knife, but no worries if I forget that, because Steve's always got a few to hand. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to Mohammed. There he is in the middle. This was the morning after, Steve with his camera smile there, and he's very happy. So the day before, we had set off from Marrakesh, and we'd done around about 60k, and we couldn't work out why we were so tired, because the road had been flat. Well, clearly the road wasn't flat. We were climbing all the way. We pulled up by the side of the road and tried to get water and milk. And we were just kind of packing that onto our bikes. And there's these three guys sat outside the shop. They're not really shops. They're like a hole in the wall, and very dark inside. Anyway, I was trying to say, do you think we can camp somewhere near here? Anyway, I couldn't really get any sense out of the guy. And this is when Gordon stepped forward and said to us, listen, guys, stand back. I can speak French, because of course the Berbers in Morocco do speak French, and proceeded to accost this poor guy with his best French. I'll do a little impression. Bonjour, je m'appelle Gordon. J'habite à Bolton. Avez-vous camping? And so on. But he did manage to make himself understood, and we were able to get a response, which was Mohammed jumping on the back of a motorbike, some other guy, and disappearing off up the road, waving for us to follow him. So we did. We were at about, I don't know, 60k, and there was about another 5k of climbing up this road. We were really on our knees. After about 20 minutes, we saw the motorbike coming back down the hill, and then we wondered what was happening. But about 5 minutes later, there's Mohammed stood by the side of the road. And then what happened was, it's one of those scenes that you get in Africa. We're in Africa, weren't we? Where Western tourists are walking through an unknown village, and all the villagers are coming out. So they were following us down this track, about a kilometre down this track, and eventually we came to Mohammed's house. If you can call it house, it was kind of like a series of buildings. Let me talk you through this. This is the kind of buildings that Mohammed lived in, and this was his shower and toilet. He was really proud of this, really excited. You know, I have a shower. So that's the toilet in dual language. And obviously it was like a Turkish style toilet there. But this was the shower, and this was quite amazing, this. So you can just see there's like a little hole underneath where there's the burning embers of a fire. And this box made out of breeze blocks has got like a concrete roof on it. You can imagine you couldn't stand up in there at all. You had to enter via the room on the left. You took your clothes off in the room on the left, and you went into that box. Very dark and smoky, and there was an assortment of bowls, large and small bowls, and then a little clay pot that had the water heating from the fire underneath, and you kind of filled up your bowl with hot and cold water, and you were able to have your shower. It was really great fun. And then Mohammed came along with a brazier in the evening, full of some embers, got us a fire going, and we had a lovely evening. And we're pretty convinced that Mohammed was watching us as we were sipping the whiskey, because the next morning, as we were getting ready to leave, we peeled off some dirhams, gave him some money, you know, to say thank you very much for letting us stay. But he wasn't happy, and we couldn't work out, he couldn't speak any English, but we knew that there was something that he wanted. And I just said to Stephen Gordon, I think he wants some whiskey. And sure enough, he was after some whiskey. So we managed to get our hip flask, and he brought a little plastic bottle. We gave him a share of whiskey, and he was as happy as anything. But that's the kind of hospitality that we've had a number of times in Morocco, and not unusual at all, really, and quite part of the adventure. Okay, I'm now going to tell you the story of the R307. So as I explained, we crossed over the High Atlas. We stayed at a place called Ouarzazate, which was kind of like on the plains, and then we had to turn left off the main road, and we were heading towards this place, Demnat, about 140k away, along the R307. And if you Google the R307, it tends to be featured in those guys on the motorbikes, with, you know, the touring motorbikes, will tend to go up that road. It's quite wild. There's no cars there, and you really are going through the heart of the Atlas Mountains. It's not like a regular pass that the lorries would use. It's a really quiet road. The first thing we did is we had to pass this solar power station, which was an amazing thing to see. That's the Google Maps version. It's not the one that was used in the James Bond film, but you've got this kind of central lance, and then all these mirrors at different times of the day will shine or reflect the sun all onto this single point, which then creates enough heat to power, I don't know, make electricity or whatever. So as we were going past that, it was quite breathtaking to see. And it was the usual many kilometers that appeared to be flat, but you were actually climbing all the time, always with that Atlas in the distance. And then that night we camped, but the photograph I showed you earlier on, we camped by this dried up riverbed, and that was really quite exciting, just out of sight of the road. And I think this is us kind of breaking camp around about maybe 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning, just packing up. And we were on the road that day for 8 o'clock. We had a nice early start because we knew we'd got a long day in the mountains. And that was Steve kind of looking wistfully at what a beautiful place we'd stayed in that night, and then straight on to the climbing. And it really was a type 2 fun day. looking back, it was one of the most amazing days that we've ever had cycling. Experiencing it was hard work. There was a lot of climbing involved, but the roads, I mean, breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. Always those power lines in the background, taking the power from that power plant over the Atlas into Marrakesh, because that's where it served. But just really beautiful roads, no traffic whatsoever. The roads to ourselves, and generally speaking, they were as good as that. As it got higher, there was a lot of debris had fallen over the roads and been compacted, so they weren't always as smooth as that, but they were absolutely gorgeous. So sun coming up over our shoulders, and we knew we were in for a glorious day. A glorious day of climbing, but it was absolutely beautiful. We had been using the old Russian military mats, which are quite expensive. They're about £15 each, and this was like a little bit that we thought we would just manage without the mats. We were never quite clear how far it was to go, and we knew that we'd got to kind of, well, we were hoping that the end would be somewhere in that near distance. But I think in actual fact, we had to cross the whole lot that you can see there over the course of the day. So quite a bit of up and down. And most of the day spent around about 1,500 meters or higher. I wouldn't say we were getting, oxygen starvation or anything like that, but we were tired. We were just regular climbing was exhausting us. It was quite a hard day. Just heading towards the snow line, lots of stops. That looks like us having a bit of a brew, and a storm drain. A little bit one of our put-me-ons, but typical gradients on the road. You can see there, it was tiring stuff. Right up into the snow line. This would have been about 2,200 meters again, and then back down again. And we were beginning to think that we'd done the worst of it. So in our minds, as we were coming down here, this was the beginning of the long descent that would take us down to Demnat. So I would imagine this is kind of around about lunchtime, at about 40k. So a little bit more descending, and a little bit more climbing. Beautiful roads, but we were beginning to feel a little bit tired. Nice to see we've got our rubbish bag there and plenty of water, but that did become an issue later on. A bit more descending, and in our minds, we're looking at our Garmin's. We're at 1,600 meters. It's got to be just around that corner. We've got the big descent coming up. Let's pitch tents at the beginning of that descent and save it for the morning. That was the plan. In actual fact, we were down at this part here. In our minds, we were home and dry. We stopped at a cafe. We had some water with us, but foolishly, we didn't stock up on water. Enjoyed our coffee. This is about 5 o'clock, and then set off for the big descent. But unfortunately, it wasn't a descent. This is Steve bringing up the rear here. And you can see there that there was absolutely nowhere that you could pitch even a single tent, never mind 3 tents. Everywhere was on an angle. And we began to climb, and it was getting darker and darker, and the roads were just getting steeper and steeper. The terrain was getting steeper and steeper. And as it began to go dark, we realized that we were going to have to stop, have our food, and potentially ride into the night until we could find somewhere that we could pitch our tent, because there was nowhere to pitch a tent. So we did do that, and we set off into the dark, and eventually we managed to find at the top of the pass. I think we rode till about 9 o'clock that night in the dark. Fortunately, we had our lights with us. We did manage to find a little bit of a clearing by the side of the road, and we pitched our tents. I think on this day here, let's have a quick look. We set off at 10 to 8. We were moving for nearly 13 hours. We were pedaling, sorry, we were on the road for 13 hours. We were pedaling for 6.5 hours, and we climbed 2,843 meters. Boy, did we know it by the end of the day. In fact, we were that tired that Gordon and Steve just put their tent up and bunked in together just to save a little bit of time getting their tent. But the next morning, this is probably one of the most beautiful mornings of my life that I can think of. Just to be there, that was probably 2,500 meters, I can't remember. The sun was just coming up over the back of the mountains behind us, and it was breathtakingly beautiful. It was just, it's why we do what we do. And it was, it was a fabulous, fabulous morning. And then we did have the descent down into Demnat at the end of the day. There is a little postscript to this, though, because Gordon claims that these are wolf prints. Now, they are quite big, and it was sufficiently in the middle of nowhere for it not to be a domesticated dog, certainly not a goat or anything. And we both poo-pooed the whole idea and said, Gordon, don't even think about it. It's not a wolf at all. But I don't know whether you saw recently, there was a poor guy cycling through Morocco a couple of weeks ago saying that he was going to have to leave because he'd been moved on by the police a number of times. I don't think he was camping very discreetly, but the police had said to him, it's too dangerous. There's snakes, robbers, and wolves. So maybe this was a wolf print. So maybe that is just something that you may need to think about if you do go to Morocco. Okay, I think that's it now. Thanks for listening. I hope that you have found something useful there, that it's not been too much of a boring story. We certainly had a fabulous time to the extent that we're going back again in a few weeks' time. But yeah, thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Daniel. That was fabulous. I've been texting one of the other people who I know is listening today, saying how Morocco has suddenly shot to very high, to the top of my cycle touring wish list. It looked incredible. The photographs were brilliant. We've got a few minutes and we've got a few questions in. So if you don't mind, I can ask you a few questions.
Oh yeah.
So you sort of answered it at the end, but Kathy has said that she did some cycle touring in Morocco and loved it, but whether you had any problems with wild dogs or other wild animals.
Yeah, we did have some problems with dogs. They tend to go for Gordon. I don't know why, because he's up the front. So they get him first, and we're ready for them. But we've all got long pumps strapped to our frames. So you whip the pump off, and that usually, gives you enough protection to kind of shoo the dogs away. We've not been bitten or anything like that. As I say, we didn't have any problem with the wolves, other than those footprints, which could have been a problem. But yeah, no. I know there's lots of tales, isn't there, about kids throwing stones and dogs making you feel absolutely terrified. We did come across some dogs, but it wasn't an issue. Great.
Yeah, they're terrifying, aren't they? I mean, I've cycled in places. Greece for me was the worst place for wild dogs, but terrifying, but never bitten.
Yeah.
There's a question about your bike. So Michael has asked about what drivetrain setup you've got on your Genesis. It says he's got a Tour de Fur, and he's interested because he struggled on the Way of the Roses on his.
Yeah. Okay, so that the bike that you've seen there, the setup that you've seen there, has an Ultegra triple with probably a 36 on the back. But I found that I just wanted a little bit more. So I've now got a Shimano double with a 22 on the front and a 46 on the back, and I can't remember what rear mech it is. But that you will never ever run out of gears with that setup, and that bike will take that setup. One of the things that I've always tried to do is to make sure that we're not running out of gears, because that's just horrible, isn't it, when you're having to pedal a gear that's too hard. And we're typically taking 20 kilos, with our luggage. So a really easy gear. If I can send the details of that on if needed.
Thank you. There's 2 questions about water. So someone's asked about what the availability of water was like, and somebody else has said, did you buy bottled water or use sterilizing tablets?
Okay, so getting water was no problem at all. Even in the most remotest place, about every 20k, you will come across a small dwelling, small gathering of homes, and you can find somewhere that will sell water. Bottled water, not a problem at all. On that occasion where we ran out of water, I refilled my bottles from a stream and just drank the water, and it was fine. But Gordon and Steve refused to do that, so they rationed their water and stuck with the bottled water. But I was happy to do that in the mountains and take that risk that there wasn't a dead sheep further up the stream. But yeah, no problem getting water at all.
That's good to know. I think people worry about that, don't they? Go into somewhere like anywhere in Africa, really, somewhere deserty. People do worry about water. We've got a few more kit questions. So a question about what bike stand you use on your Genesis. Susan says she's tried several, but so far hasn't found a good one.
Yeah, okay. I've got a Plesher, just a pretty standard stand, and it's not as stable as a double stand, and it does mean that you need to load your panniers in a set order, otherwise the bike will fall over. But once they're loaded, it's fairly balanced, and it will take the weight, no problem at all. I've avoided getting the one that fits to the rear triangle because I'm frightened of damaging my frame, and I'm not quite sure it'll fit with the disc brakes. So I've just the Tour de Fer has a little bracket underneath that you can fix your a stand to. So that's the stand that I'm using.
That's good. I know that stands are something that has been discussed at previous festivals, and I can never remember the name. We bought one for one of our bikes. I can never remember the name of it, but it's like a super strong one. If anyone can remember the super strong one that always gets recommended at the festival, do pop it in the chat box. What kind of chairs did you use? Someone said they've got chair envy.
Yeah. Gordon has got a two-legged chair, where the other 2 legs are your legs. So there's a bit of a balancing going on. That's super lightweight. I've got one of those, but I tend to take just one of the cheap Chinese. They come out in sections, and they've got a little bit of cloth cover. It is probably an extra kilo, but it's important. I think we had that at the last festival, didn't we? It splits the audience, but I think it's really important that you get that little bit of a rest off your knees, to bring that comfort. I
totally agree. I'm a complete convert, fairly recent convert, but for me it's my hips. My hips get so sore constantly sitting on the floor. And Helix is the brand. Is it Helix or Helinox, the brand that everyone talks about? But they're about 80 quid each. And I know that Aldi did like a cheap version a few years ago, so I've got one of the Aldi ones. Yeah, I've got the Helinox one, but Steve's got one of the cheap ones. I don't think it really matters. They're all the same. Yeah, they are, aren't they? Yeah. On kit, somebody has said, what kit would you leave behind? Or perhaps what kit would the other 2 leave behind? It's probably something to do with coffee makers. But every time we do leave coffee related stuff behind, we're always saying that goes on the list for what to take next time. So yeah, you can always buy a coffee, can't you, somewhere, but it's lovely to have the smell of the coffee in the morning. I'm usually up first, giving them to a nudge. I take them a coffee, and it's nice to have that with you. So I don't think we pare it right down to the bare minimum. Our rule is you dress yourself at home in clothes that would be okay for the worst weather that you're expecting. And then you take those off, and that's your kit that you take with you. Obviously, maybe a spare pair of clothes that you wear on your skin.
but that's it. We don't take multiple sets of anything. It's slimmed right down, but it is heavy touring. It's not the super lightweight touring that some people do. We take all the kit. We just try and take the minimal, weight of the kit that we take.
Apart from the 4 knives and the 100
yeah,
cable ties.
yeah, we're working on him.
I enjoyed the photograph of it. It was good. It was good. It makes me feel a bit better about the stuff we end up taking. How much cooking fuel did you use? I know you talked a bit about your stove.
Yeah. Okay. So when we stopped in the mountains to refill those kids, we'd probably used about half a litre by then, and we were getting short. So we bought another probably 3/4 of a litre of fuel. So a week's fuel for the 3 of us. Both those occasions, we only had one stove. Steve's bought that stove since. So I would say 1.5 litres would get you through the week for 3 of you.
Okay, that's always good to know, actually, isn't it? It's a good stat, that.
Yeah.
Can you say a bit more about the CTC plastic bags and packing the bikes? Okay.
The first time we went in 2017, we ordered them from CTC. I think they're about 15 quid. This is just an enormous plastic bag. And we were naively just pushed our bikes into the bag, taped them up, and appeared at baggage, only to find that they were not going to let us on unless we began to kind of collapse our bike slightly. So what we have done now is that we will take this saddle out, strap it to the frame, twist the bars, take the front wheel off, zip tie it to your frame, but you can leave your tubeless low rider on, and you can leave your rear rack on, and you're going to be okay. So lots of tape. We put in a dead hub across the front forks just to make sure they're not going to get bent. They're all steel bites, so if the rear hanger does get bent, you can bend it back. It's not like it's going to snap off like an aluminium hanger. And no real issues really. Just loads of zip ties, bit of pipe lagging, and loads of tape. We find that that's just the cheapest way. We've actually seen, each time we've seen our bikes being very carefully placed to one side to go in either first or last into the aircraft. So we're fairly confident that the baggage handlers can see it's a bike and are going to treat it a little bit more carefully rather than just a box.
Yeah, that's definitely the theory, isn't it? I think there's only one more question at the moment. Oh, someone said, actually, sorry to have missed, if I've missed this, what stove did you take? It was the multi-fuel, wasn't it?
Optimus Opti-fuel.
Not Optimus Prime, that's the Transformer.
No, Optimus Prime.
Primus Omnifuel, Primus Omnifuel.
Omnifuel, something like that, yeah.
Great. We have the same stove, it's excellent. Going for years. And then finally, the last question that we've got on the Q&A box, just a reminder, if anyone else wants to ask a question, please do pop it in the Q&A box because I might not see it on the chat box. Would you recommend rest days given the terrain that you're cycling through?
We're mixed on this. Gordon and Steve are great fans of rest days. For me, we are on a cycle touring holiday. The clue's in the word, in the title. I wouldn't be wanting to have rest days on a week's tour, but obviously on a longer tour, then absolutely. But it's only a week. We typically will do 350 to 400 kilometers during that week. So although it is really mountainous, I wouldn't be suggesting a rest day, but I think that's personal preference, isn't it?
It's always going to be personal preference. Somebody has asked about where you can get a CTC bag now, because Cycling UK has been out of stock for months. I do believe that Wiggle sell them, so have a look at the Wiggles website. And then there's been a question about charging and how you keep phones and so on charged.
Okay, so we all take a power bank, and then on both occasions we've managed on some nights to get to a power point. we've stayed in people's houses. Just random strangers have said, come and stay in my house. And we've managed to get power there. What I've done this year is linked my dynamo to a sine wave revolution charging point so that I can take the power off the dynamo. But that's probably going to just about keep your phone topped up. If you want to charge your Garmin as well, you're going to need a power bank and access to a plug at least maybe once a week. I would say that's the way forward.
Great, thank you. And then one final question is, where's next? I know you've got a Morocco trip coming up.
Yeah, we've got a Morocco trip coming up, and we've got a tour in July. We're going to squeeze in a week where we're going to go from Holyhead to Chepstow on that long last Cymru, and there'll be something. We did have a Sicily trip booked and planned, ready for August 2020, but that had to get cancelled because of COVID. So we keep saying we'll go back to Sicily. We've done Croatia, and Croatia was absolutely the most beautiful place that you could think of. So maybe we'll go back to Croatia. Who knows?
Yeah, that would be great. Croatia's beautiful, isn't it? Actually, there is a final question from somebody called Steve, who I suspect we've been looking at photographs from, which is, why do you always play such dodgy music?
I
suspect you don't have to answer that.
No. I do like to have a bit of music going on every now and again. And unfortunately, Steve and Gordon have to listen to that.
Keeps it entertaining.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. That was a really brilliant talk and a great way to start the festival. So I hope everyone's enjoyed it. I've had lots of lovely comments in the chat box, which I'll save down and send to you. So thanks everyone for joining us. The next talk is at 5 o'clock, and it's about Iceland. And again, I hope it's going to be a really beautiful set of photographs from cycling the highlands of Iceland. And then at 8 o'clock tonight, we've got a debate hosted by Jack Thurston about whether cycle touring needs a rebrand. Bike packing, adventure cycling is all very cool. Cycle touring, having seen these photographs, I think cycle touring does not need a rebrand. It shows that you can do amazing stuff even on fully laden bikes. Great, thank you everybody. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Thank you.